So thank you very much. Thank you, Michael. Thank you for the organizer to organizing this discussion today. We have quite a lot of time, but I will try to be as short as it is possible to be when you speak about degrowth. So I will try to speak around 40-45 minutes, and after we will have a lot of time for discussion, and I hope that you will have very challenging questions to go ahead. So what we present today is what we developed in a book called The Degrowth Project. The book is not translated yet into English. It's translated into different languages. It was published first in French. It's a book I wrote with three friends from France, Stéphane and Isabelle and Christophe. So I send my greetings to them. They couldn't come today. And in this book, what we try to do, it's to put together a lot of ideas, critics, thinking, experimentation, experiences, what we could observe in the degrowth movement in France, in other degrowth movements all around the world, and also in a lot of other movements which are not necessarily degrowth. And what we try to do in this book called The Degrowth Project, it's not to propose a project which is applicable everywhere for everybody or something like that, but to try to open our mind in suggesting new paths, to open new possibles, to implement meaningful, fruitful discussion. So I hope it's going to be successful, and I will try to show to you what is around in this book. So I will make a presentation in three parts. The first part, I will try to define what is degrowth. Secondly, I will speak about what could be a degrowth project. And thirdly, I will speak about how to implement it in the time. What could be the steps toward the degrowth transformation of the society. And at the end, I will make a short conclusion about the challenges that we face relating to the news, and after the floor will be yours. So first, what is degrowth? We give three main definitions to degrowth. It's first a provocative slogan. Degrowth is a word which was used in this meeting like that when first time by Vincent Liegey, who was a marketing project manager in Publicis, who quit his job in the late 90s because he was pissed off with what he was doing, manipulating the brain of the people, making frustration to push the people to consume always more things what they don't need. And he heard about a book published in 1979, which was a translation of text from Nicolas Georgescu-Roegen, a Romanian economist. And the title given to the French edition of that book was La Décroissance. And he said, semantic tool, bomb word to initiate debates, to question the physical limits to growth, the fact that we live on a planet which is called the Earth, which have limited resources, which are some limited cycles, what we have to respect if we don't want to destroy everything. And also to question all our addiction to growth, psychological, cultural, social addictions to growth, and more which are economical, institutional, political addictions to growth. And he thought, and I think he was right, based on our experience with the degrowth movement in the last 15 years, he saw that here we have a very interesting tool to initiate discussion, to go deeper in the understanding of what's happening around, to question a lot of implicit beliefs which are not questioned anymore. When we listen to mainstream politicians, there is this type of totem always coming back. Growth. We need economic growth. Whatever is what we speak about, whatever the problem we speak about, it's always economic growth. But we never question whether it's sustainable, whether it's desirable, and we never question what's the content of that growth. Growth for what, for who, how, to produce what, to consume what, to exchange how, and so on. This word is quite criticized also inside the degrowth movement because it's not a word which is very effective to generate a very large movement. And I think it's not a problem because the word is a word to push even always further and further discussion and thinking. The main role of degrowth movement connected to a lot of other movements, it's always to question what we do, what the answers, what we are proposing, are they really sustainable? Are they really meaningful? Are they really taking into account all the parameters, all the challenges what we face? And it's not a problem as well that degrowth has this negative feeling. First, it's not like other type of slogan, which been or can be very easily emptied from their content. Think about what's happened with sustainable development in the last decade. Nowadays, you can buy everything in the name of sustainability, and even don't speak about the communication of the French government around the COP21, where it's only communication, and no, you can buy a green air ticket to spend a very fancy weekend in a palace, air-conditioned palace in Tunisia, and this type of things in the name of green, sustainability, in the name of saving the planet, and this type of things. With degrowth, it's going to be more difficult for the marketing to empty from its content, because in its soul itself, you have this questioning about our growth mania, about dominating in this model of society culturally. Also, going through this logic, degrowth is also path, what we call around decolonization of our imaginary. It's to question individually, collectively, politically, all the basis, all the beliefs, implicit beliefs behind all the basis of our model of society, based on capitalism, neoliberalism, consumerism, productivism, religion of technologies and science. I can add a lot of concepts behind. Developmentism and so on, modernity and this type of thing. We should question what is really behind and how to really bring meaningful answers to all the challenges that we face right now. So that's the first definition of degrowth, a provocative slogan whose main goal is to try to have meaningful, deep, radical discussion, questioning about the basis on which we construct our models of society. The second definition what we give to degrowth, it's a multidimensional thinking, multidimensional or interdisciplinary field of research. It's very interesting to see how degrowth, and I think that's very important, brought together a lot of critics, deconstruction of the growth paradigm of our Western model of society. First, the physical limits to growth. Degrowth is really strongly based on energetic, environmentalist, physical studies showing that we are already more than facing the limits, the physical limits to growth. It's all what we can hear in the media nowadays about climate change, biodiversity loss, acidification of oceans, pollution, and so on and so on. It's something which is quite well known, but it's not enough. As Michael said in the beginning, I was first an engineer, and I started to be interested in degrowth in studying the physical limits to growth. In particular, I studied a lot peak of production of oil, peak everything, and I started to realize that we are really in a frightening track. We are really going quicker and quicker to the wall. And I started to be quite pessimistic. I started to be very fatalist, catastrophist, and also depressed. And I realized that when I was only bringing this narrative in the public discussion, or when I was only speaking about these physical limits to growth with my friends, my colleagues, my family, and everything, it didn't really implement any positive reaction or active answer to the challenges that we faced. So we connected these physical limits to growth with the cultural limits to growth. And I started to question also, do I have a meaningful life as an engineer working for a corporation, like some of my friends working for the military industrial complex, or working to implement always more planned obsolescence on goods what we don't really need? And I started to realize that, in fact, we've never been as materially rich as we are in our society, but maybe we are not so rich based on meaningful life, based on solidarity, conviviality. We are facing big inequalities. We are facing a high level of violence. We are facing a lot of problems with politics, with corruption, individualistic dynamics in our society and everything. And we started to question all these problems, connecting all these challenges that we face, not as independent challenges, but as interconnected challenges. We are not facing, on one hand, an environmental crisis, on the other hand, an economic social crisis, and on the other hand, a political crisis. We are facing all interconnected crises, what we have to put together with a radical thinking, taking the problem from the roots, to start to construct another narrative, to start to construct dynamics to reappropriate meaningful life, to question what do we produce, how do we produce it, for what kind of use. How can I reappropriate my relationship, my autonomy on the tools what I use, on the institution, on economics, on politics for more direct democracy, all these type of things. And degrowth, connecting together all these questions, try to implement on different levels serene, democratic transition to new models of society. What we have to think, implement, experiment, experience, and construct step by step. And when I say new models of society, I really insist on that. It's not one unique model. It's a diversity of different type of model, different type of paths, and different type of thinking and so on. It's to go back to a biodiversity of political thinking. So degrowth was really influenced by different writers. For example, people criticizing development, people like Serge Latouche, like François Partant, who experienced development in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and saw how it has an impact of destruction on social equilibriums, on social, on economic, cultural, political, traditional equilibriums in other society. That's why we don't speak about underdeveloped countries, but under-westernized countries. We also question the centrality of work. For example, with André Gorz, questioning how to switch from a society when you have a forced job, when you don't really decide what do we produce, how do we produce it and everything. It's what I spoke about with my friends working for corporation in Paris, earning a lot of money, but working for the military-industrial complex, where they are mostly pacifists. This is already a big contradiction. It's this study in France showing that more than 50% of the people are unhappy with their job. And France is quite a well-protected country in this economic crisis what we face. So how to switch from a society when we don't decide what could be our activities to a society with meaningful, self-organized activities to really fulfill the basic needs what we have. We think about autonomy with Cornelius Castoriadis to question what could be democratic societies, how we can invent another type of education, how we can have some active citizens in the society. And citizens, as Castoriadis said, quoting Aristotle, democracy is a society where citizens are able to be directed and to direct, are able to understand institution what we have around us, are able to understand the economic system what we have, and to have a control, a democratic control on the tools and the institution what we have around. So it's really to rethink the social interaction, the social organization, the education, the main values what you put in the center of the society. And to quote the last person, I'm hesitating, but maybe I will speak about Karl Polanyi, because we are in Budapest and Polanyi was from Hungary. It's really to question the role played by economics in our imaginary, in our social interaction, in our political life. And Polanyi, in particular with his famous book, The Great Transformation, but also all his other work studying history of civilization, where he wanted to see what was the role played by the markets, economic markets in the society. He realized that in every society, every civilization, there were markets. But it was not a central value. It was one part of the social organization, where nowadays we live in what we call the religion of economics, that in the name of economics, we're going to implement austerity plans, destroy education, destroy basic solidarity between the people, destroy institutions which are still making our society democracy. And also, we live in societies of homo economicus, where even if a big part of our activities, of our interaction, are not profit-oriented, are not based on money, even if, like for example, what we do today, for example, all what is around friendship, the relationship to the family, volunteer job, volunteer activities, solidarity dynamics in the society and everything, all the tasks what we do at home are not calculated in the GDP, are not calculated from an economic perspective. The air what we breathe and so on. And still, we always think based on so-called economic rationality, which is maybe one of the most irrational indicators what we implemented. So bringing all this type of thinking together, we try to connect the dots, we try to connect the circles, and to implement a better understanding of the challenges what we face, to understand that most of the challenges we face are interconnected and we cannot solve them one by one separately, but we have to re-question globally the principles, the basis on which we construct new hopes, new models of society. So this is the second definition of degrowth, a multidimensional thinking, trying to implement transition from the growth mania toward new models of society which will be sustainable and desirable. The third definition what we give of degrowth, it's a new movement. I think it's very interesting because we don't really see how this movement is working. I've been in this movement for almost 10 years and I still discover a lot of things. It's a very organic movement organized around horizontal network of different type of collectives, groups, movements, NGOs, local initiative, or sometimes individuals and even parties. And I think it's very important to rethink the way we construct the society in a decentralized way, in a more self-organized way, and also on different levels. It could be a newspaper. It could be some people who are implementing a local cooperative, and so on. That's why we speak about the three political levels of degrowth. Individual, with voluntary simplicity, with decolonization of our imaginary. It's all these people, including most of the degrowth activists, who try. One, it's possible, and it's not always possible, because we live in a system where we have a very strong chains, in particular cultural, but also economic chains. When it's possible, we try to reappropriate our productions, our work, our free time, our activities, our relationship with other people, our consumption, to be freed from all these strong social dynamics that we should always work more, to consume more, to be somebody. The second level, and most of the people who are in this individual approach are active also in the second level, it's what we call the collective level. It's all these dynamics all around the world of people who locally self-organize themselves to experiment, implement new economic model, new way to produce what is needed to fulfill the basic needs, new democratic experiences. It's all this movement like the transition network, transition initiative, transition tone, permaculture, agroforestry, agroecology, DIY movements, local currency. I had a lot of other examples, community gardens, all these type of things. And in Budapest you can find a lot. I am involved in different type of activities like that in Budapest around Cargonomia, Cyclonomia, around the local organic farming and so on. And you can find that all around the world, not only in Europe, not only in Western Europe, but also in the South. And it's very interesting because in this movement we can see that solutions are already here, are already working very well. And what we can observe, it's what I experience myself in my everyday life, being active in such initiative. What we can observe, that you see people who reappropriate meaningful activities, reappropriate their life, and people who are happy, even if it's not easy. I can tell you that in this economic system to implement alternatives and to survive economically, it's not easy. It requires a lot of creativity. It requires to work much more, but we get a lot of very positive feedback, mostly human. And the third level, which is also very important, connected to the individual one and the collective one, it's the political one. Degrowth is trying to bring the deconstruction of the growth mania, of the growth paradigm in the debate, and also to promote the initiatives which are already working very well, and also to suggest what we did with our book as well, different type of reforms, institutional, economic, social reform, which could be a good help to keep going through this transition of the society, which is, I think, underway. Degrowth started first in France, around La Décroissance. It was a movement which was connecting different type of group of activists, different type of intellectual movements, some newspaper, journals, and stuff like that, and it became a bit international. First, I would say mostly in 2008 with the first International Degrowth Conference, which took place in Paris. Since then, we got 3 other conferences, one in Barcelona, one in Venice, and last time it was in Leipzig. And it was very interesting to see in Leipzig that there were 3,500 people coming from 74 countries, from every continent. From far away, not everybody was degrowth or wanted to be labelized as degrowth, which is, I think, very good. But everybody brought a different narrative, a different approach, depending on their own culture, their own political, historic context, to implement even more and more fruitful discussion. For example, it was very interesting to see degrowth, which is mostly strong in the Latin countries, in France, in Spain, in Italy, with a very strong philosophical background or intellectual approach, connect with the Anglo-Saxon, let's say, related degrowth movement, which is a transition network, where it's more pragmatic approach, where they say, okay, French are very kind, but stop talking, let's self-organize ourselves locally and implement resilient communities. And they bring another narrative, they bring another experience, which is very complementary to what is done in France, for example. Also, it was very interesting to see people coming from Latin America with buen vivir, good life, bringing another type of philosophy, maybe a bit more spiritual, to question how can we rethink our relationship to the earth, to each other? How can we get rid of the Anthropocene to consider human beings as always competitors fighting with each other and dominating the environment and everything? And I can add other movements like the one coming from Africa, criticizing development, or the one coming from Asia, bringing in the tradition of Gandhi the logic of voluntary simplicity. And it's very interesting to see that all around the world we see people questioning what we question with degrowth, starting from a different point, starting with a different way to approach the problem, but somehow we see that dialogue is underway and some convergence are under construction. So the next International Degrowth Conference will be in Budapest next year. And we are very enthusiastic also to bring what I presented before, this type of dialogue all around the world, but in particular East-West dialogue, because degrowth is mostly coming from Western Europe. And it will be very interesting to see how degrowth is welcome here in a post-socialist political, social, cultural context. So that was the third definition of degrowth, a movement which is horizontal, organized around a network, horizontal, decentralized network of different initiatives where we don't really see the borders. I arrive to the second part of my presentation. What could be a degrowth project? In 2009 in France, we decided to participate to the European election. Not to be elected, because first we didn't have any chance, and secondly we're not particularly interested to take the power, because if we take the power, we will be taken by the power. But to occupy the space offered by an election, to bring some discussion, debates, to question growth, to question what's happening around with the European Union institution. Is it really democratic? What's happening around with the lobbies and this type of things? And when we started to launch our campaign, we realized that we are very great to criticize everything, to deconstruct a lot of paradigm, a lot of values, philosophies, or dogma. But we were quite weak when it was time to suggest solutions. So we sat, we made big brainstorming, and we reached quickly a first conclusion. In fact, solutions are already existing. You just have to look at what I spoke about before, all these local initiatives. When you see people who locally, in a small scale, it's still minority movement, but it's full of hope. People who locally reappropriated tools, inventing new tools to produce differently, in a more sustainable way, to exchange in a much more fair way, to take decisions more democratically. You already have a very fantastic number, incredible number of creativity and solutions which are already going on. And we didn't stop there. We started to look at each other, the people involved in such initiative. And we realized that we are quite similar to each other, quite similar to me, type of people who are quite wealthy, quite protected economically in this model of society. We have the chance to travel, to study, to take time to read books, to take a distance with this dominant economic model of society. And we are not really representative to the majority of the people who are facing austerity plans, who are facing all these fears, rising fears, mostly economic fear. And we started to question how to connect with that people. That a transformation of the society only coming from its local dynamics is far away from being enough. So we started to think about tools, economic and social tools, enabled to repoliticize the society, resocialize politics, enabled to provide some serenity, to somehow bring some social dynamics where people can start to project themselves with hope in the future, and as citizens we will be active in the transformation of the society to one more meaningful life. So we dealt with basic income, unconditional basic income, which is an old tool, and we brought it with other people back to the debates. And we were last week in Budapest in an international basic income conference, and we could see how in a few years this debate is stronger and stronger all around Europe. We started also to think about tools like a local currency or alternative local economic system. And when we speak about such tools, what is interesting for us, it's not to have the magical tools, because it doesn't exist, but it's more about how to find dynamics to connect the people locally, to recreate interaction, trust, solidarity, and everything. And it's what we experience with our alternatives. We started also to think how to repoliticize the people, going through with grassroots movement dynamics. That one of the biggest problems what we face in our society, which have very terrible impacts on our psychology, on our subjective well-being, it's inequalities. We can see it's quite well documented. In particular, there was a big buzz around last Thomas Piketty's book around that we are facing such a high level of inequalities. We are reaching this symbolic point with 1% of the people appropriating 50% of the goods. So it's questioning our society that we have some people somehow, and we accept it, who have a way of life which is unsustainable. To support this way of life, we need to destroy the planet, and we need also to exploit other people or other regions in the world. So it's something which shouldn't be accepted. But what is, I think, the worst around these inequalities is that it creates also a lot of frustration in the society, because human beings are also social animals, and they compare themselves with their neighbor, and in a society of spectacle as we are, we compare ourselves through the mass media with the richest people. And we keep implementing these dynamics in the society that even if we have most of the people in Western Europe, all the basic goods, what we need to have a decent life, we keep being frustrated. We always want to get more. We are frustrated because we don't have the last car. We don't have the last mobile phone. We don't have the biggest TV screen and everything. And also it questions, how can we be happy in a society of always more? How can we fulfill our basic needs when we always desire more? And it's what we speak about with the frugal abundance society. So we should question the sense of the limit, individually and collectively. So we started to speak about the old economic tool, which was implemented in particular in the United States in the Second World War, to implement a maximum income. And also here, I would say that the main goal is not to have a very beautiful economic tool which is well working with the best institution and everything, but it's more to implement social dynamics where we understand individually and collectively that there is some level I should refuse because it won't be good for my happiness, it won't be good for my well-being, and it won't be good for the society. And connected to the maximum income, we spoke also about different types of reforms, questioning why the first international budget is a military-industrial complex, why the second international budget is marketing, why do we spend so much money and why so much time working to construct a lot of things what we don't need, a lot of gadgets, to produce type of products which are not repairable, but based on planned obsolescence and everything. So to really rethink the way we produce the things. The last point we were interested in, it was in 2009, just after what's the so-called crisis, 2008 crisis. And we started to have everywhere in Europe this narrative that in the name of public debt, We cannot finance anymore that or that. We cannot finance anymore education. We cannot finance anymore public transport or health system and everything. So in the name of this public debt, we started to deconstruct, to attack institutions which are central for our well-being. So we started to investigate what are these public debt? Where are they coming from? How were they constructed? Why the European Central Bank, for example, is independent and it's not a tool given to the politics, to politicians to implement what is chosen democratically. And we realize, in the case of France or other countries, that a big part of this public debt are unethical, illegitimate, and we think that we should implement some audits, democratic audits, to really investigate which part we don't pay back, because it's illegitimate and unethical, and which part we have to pay back, and in which condition we pay it back. And to go further, we should put back economics in its right place as a tool to implement policies and not the contrary. So we should democratically reappropriate central banks, money creation, have a bigger democratic control of bank and finance sectors, and use these tools to keep going on transitions toward more sustainability and more desirable, meaningful lives. It's what we call to get rid of the religion of economics. And also here, the main goal is not only to have fantastic tools, but really to culturally question the role played in our everyday life and political organization of our society, the role played by economy. So we put everything all together, and we arrive to a central tool, which is on one hand very interesting technically, but I think it's not the most important point in it, but which is also, I think, a very interesting tool to start to question ourselves on what do we produce, how do we produce it, for what kind of use. We call it unconditional autonomy allowance connected to a maximum income, and it's a bit like an unconditional basic income, but partially demonetarized. So you can have a part which is given in cash, in national or transnational currency, can be given in local currency, for example, to buy some locally produced in a sustainable way food or clothes or tools or this type of things. And it's also given in access to resources like water, like energy, like a certain number of square meters to have a decent accommodation or to have meaningful activities. And it can be also access to public services. And also here, the main goal is not only to say that you have the right to have access to a free education, but the main goal is to implement discussion in the society to question what kind of education do we implement in our society? Do we want to have a type of education what we can have nowadays in our society, which is what, if I go back to Ivan Illich's critics about it, implementing the idea of having a hierarchy in the society, giving marks to the children, accepting that there is this type of top-down relationship in the society, and to have at the end some docile workers for the productivity system. On the contrary to what I spoke about in the beginning, quoting Cornelius Castoriadis' autonomy, we want to have another type of education where people would learn how to be active, free, and there is no freedom without responsibility, so responsible citizens participating to the society, implementing dynamics of dialogue to be able to, when there is a conflict, listen to each other, nonviolent communication, participation to the life of the society and everything. And the same, we can question about the health system. Do we want to have a health system in the hand of the logic of the profits, of the pharmaceutical lobbies, where we can see how absurd it is, for example, in the French public model, where the logic is to corrupt as much as possible the hospital or the doctors to sell always more medicines. Or on the contrary, you want to have a system going back to the roots of health, where Hippocrates said, your medicine will be your food, and to construct a model of society where we don't create so many diseases, so many accidents, so much stress, and so on. And we can question everything like that. So this idea is fantastic. I arrived to the third part of my presentation. How to go there? Again, I'm back to what I spoke about 2 times already. I think the transition is underway. I think in our society, we have different trends. And one is this silent transformation of the society, starting from grassroots movement, starting with decolonization of our imaginary, starting with voluntary simplicity, and all these dynamics around local initiative. It's unbelievable to see how in the last years we could see emerging a lot of projects. And we can imagine that on the long term, following these trends, we can have a very, very big transformation of the society, reaching some critical mass, and make the society move to a new model of society, or new models of society. I think it's not so likely for mostly 2 reasons. The first one, that we don't have time. I think we are facing very critical challenges, so we need to have also answers, and not only in long term. And the second reason is that when you make your community garden or your local currency or your DIY bike shop and everything, and it's still in a very low scale, you can do it without any problem. But when you start to challenge other economic interests, sooner or later, you will face the answers from the lobbies. We will make pressure on the decision makers, and we will push to implement laws which will block you. It's what we could already see, for example, with the privatization of the seeds, where peasants cannot reuse themselves the seeds because there are some private property on that. So we need to have all these grassroots initiatives, try to connect them somehow in keeping each their autonomy and independence and creativity and so on, and also to connect them to other political or social or civic movements to step by step not take the power, because as I said, if we are only interested in power or taking strategy, we will be taken by the power, but make pressure on decision makers to implement laws where what we do, for example, with Cargonomia here, we can be protected, respect the law, have some laws which are adapted not only for agribusiness, but for alternative ways to produce food, to have some laws to be free to experiment, and also laws which step by step make the corporation or the big business pay their taxes normally, what they don't do nowadays, pay for the destruction of the environment what they face, and also maybe pay for the side effects of the exploitation and the work organization what we have all around the world. Also, we can think about another redistribution of public money, and I think even more important, to question, and I'm back maybe here to Polanyi, when we see how capitalism was implemented in forcing the people when they were where their goods, their commons, were appropriated by the market, to make a pass on the other direction, to question how to reappropriate the commons for meaningful activities and to fulfill the basic needs of the people based on self-organization, following these trends. A second step, still following the same trends, which could be interesting, where I think we can find a very large consensus all around Europe and maybe in other countries, could be to question how to solve what is one of the biggest challenge what we face in our society, with very devastating consequences on the well-being in our society, how to face unemployment in implementing different type of reforms, also here in a decentralized way, maybe based first on volunteer dynamics to allow the right to the people to work less and reappropriate some meaningful life. Again, I will take the example of an engineer. If an engineer working for a big corporation, if he goes to his boss and says, I'm very happy to work 50 hours per week, but I would like to start to work for 25 hours per week. Usually the answer is very clear. It's either you resign or you work for 50 hours. So we can implement type of law which protects the right to work less, which protects also the right to share the work and implement like platform where 2 engineers with the same skills, same experience could connect and share the project like I work for a company. Next year, I have to implement 2 big projects. I meet with another engineer, and I say, I work for 6 months, you work for 6 months, and I have time to reappropriate, to be active in the transformation of the society, or to be active just to spend time with my parents, with my family, or to deal with some hobby and stuff like that. And the last step, which could be interesting in the transformation of the society, could be the implementation of unconditional basic income. It's technically very easy to implement. It's possible to finance it. We made some studies, for example, in France, that from tomorrow, without big modification of anything, without implementing new taxes, we can finance unconditional basic income to everybody for 700 euros per person and 400 euros per children. It just needs political will or political vision and social pressure toward these dynamics. And we can think about implementing such a basic income and connecting it with maximum income, connecting it with different taxes, what I spoke about, to reduce our military industrial budget, to tax marketing, plus obsolescence, and all these type of toxic things what we have in our society. Reappropriating central banks, money creation, questioning which part of the public debt we don't pay back because they are illegitimate. And step by step, following the transformation of the society, coming from grassroots movement, with basic income, you have even a higher participation to such a transformation. All the social studies of experimentation around basic income are showing how when you provide security to the people, they become more responsible and more active, more entrepreneurial in the life and the well-being of their communities. So we can think step by step, following these trends, to demonetize this basic income. Like, for example, here in Budapest, we have this basic income for 700 euros or maybe less because life is not as expensive as in France, but just we don't care. It's just an example. So we have this basic income for 700 whatsoever. And it was implemented a local currency with colleagues of Cargonomia and different farms all around Budapest and the community garden movement here in Budapest, where we produce enough vegetable and fruits for the whole city, which can be bought with a local currency. So you don't get any more 700 of a national or transnational currency, but you get 500 plus a local currency where you get your fruit. In the same way, in Budapest was implemented another management of the water, where you don't pay for the first liters of water what you need to drink, to cook, to wash yourself, to wash the dishes, and after you pay a very expensive price for a bad use of the water and everything. So you don't get any more of this 500 plus local currency for food, but you get 400 local currency for food and a certain number of liters of water for your life. So the idea, to conclude, about this unconditional autonomy allowance and this idea to try to open our mind, implementing new policies and everything, and we just finalized also a study with a lot of figures around it, looking at different scenarios from this degrowth project to a green growth dynamic and everything, to see what is possible to implement from an environmental, from an energetic point of view, and also which is possible to implement from a realistic, economic, social, work, inequality, and so on dynamics. And we saw that it's something which is totally feasible, it's something which is meaningful, it's something which gives us the hope to stay within the limits, environmental limits, what we already overpassed, and it's something which could bring solutions to face all the violence which are going on in the world, all the wars, what the West is doing, because we are in war, we shouldn't forget about it. Hungary as well is a country which has been in war, which was in the coalition to make war in Iraq. We could see the consequences of this war. We should also question all these interdependencies all around the world. With colonization, post-colonization, the West will never be able to implement such a high level of consumption or overconsumption with a footprint which is above 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 planets for United States, without stealing the resources from other parts of the world. So we have to question that as well. And it's a tools also, and I think that's the most important, and that's what we try to do with our book, which is not applicable like that very easily. It's not only a technical tool. I would say we don't really care about technical tools, even if we will need them, some. But we will see later we have great engineers, economics, and everything for technical tools. I think it's a tool to really start to open our mind, reappropriate hope, things that other possibles are really here, already working, and we can start to construct another narrative than the one, what I could hear again from President Hollande in France, following the terrorist attack in Paris, where we keep reproducing always the same mistakes. After 9/11, we went to make wars. These wars created new terrorists, created new murders, creating new injustice and everything. And the answer, what we propose again today, is the same. Without questioning our way of life, whether it's sustainable or not, what the consequence of our illusion of the freedom to consume. What's the consequence when we go to a supermarket and we start to buy this product or this product made by people we never meet? We don't know in which conditions they live. We don't know in which conditions they are exploited. And we never face, we start to face it, the environmental consequences of this illusion of freedom to consume and everything. So the idea of degrowth is really to try to connect the dots, to bring some question, to bring some solution, to show some example, and we hope that what we do could help to implement dialogue, to implement fruitful, meaningful discussion, and to stop going to the same direction where we keep implementing always more and more and more violence and barbarian. So thank you very much.